Hey friends, I know that so many of you listening to this are carrying a heavy weight of pain and loss. When we start to process what's happened in our lives, we often find ourselves paralyzed by the pain and not really knowing where to go from here. We even begin to hear or tell ourselves lies like, this is the end of our story, this will define you. And trust me, I've been there. But with the help of others, I was able to navigate my way out of that valley. And at Nothing is Wasted, we exist to help you navigate your pain and even find purpose in that pain. So if you are new to our community and wondering where to start, or if you've been with us for some time and you're just looking to take the next step, we're hosting a free live call just for you. In it, we're going to talk about 5 steps to taking back your story, no matter what you've gone through. In this call, our founder, Davey Blackburn, will share more of his story, and he's going to teach you 5 critical steps you'll have to take to rewrite your own story. This call is 60 minutes long, but I promise you it will be well worth your time, because in it you will learn how to regain a sense of agency and begin thriving, not just surviving in the midst of trying circumstances. Why having more questions than answers may be an essential part of moving forward. How to get rid of the overwhelming negative emotions that tend to bog you down and get you stuck. The one keystone decision that will help you get out of your pain. How to listen to the right voices when everyone seems to have an opinion on what you should do next, and a ton more. If you are feeling weighed down or paralyzed by the pain you've experienced, you don't have to stay there. And Davey will be your guide and show you the way back to thriving. Go to nothingiswasted.com/start here to sign up for this free live call, or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, just click the link in the show notes. We've made it extremely easy to sign up, and we're offering multiple dates and time options for you for this live call to work with your calendar. I believe this one step could be the very breakthrough you need to put you on the redemptive path God has for you. Open the browser on your phone right now and go to nothingiswasted.com/start here, or just click the link we've included in the show notes of this episode. We are in your corner, and we can't wait to connect with you soon.
Well, hello and welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Davey Blackburn, and in joining me again, we have a guest co-host, Amy Sylvester.
Hello.
Amy, great to have you.
Yeah, so good to be here, Davey. Thank you for inviting me to join you on this episode.
Absolutely. Well, Amy, we have a conversation today, or I guess I should say Eric Shoemaker has a conversation today with Dr. Mark McNear. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Mark McNear is a licensed clinical social worker. He has a private practice in New Jersey. He has over 30 years of experience in clinical practice. And just like most of us, as we are going from pain to purpose, the things that we're doing now has been heavily influenced by the pain that we've walked through in our past. Mm-hmm. And that is absolutely true of Dr. McNear. I mean, I don't even know if we can qualify this conversation. I don't even think we can set it up.
No.
In any way that's going to do it justice, because of all the things that he has gone through and what they talk about in this.
It's kind of unbelievable, like the amount of things he experienced as a child, nonetheless, and then even through his life, just how I appreciated his vulnerability, I appreciated his authenticity, and he just kind of went there, he shared it all. And I think that no matter what your story is, you're going to have a piece of this that sticks with you. I sure did. I'm still thinking about it. And so, I think it's going to impact lots of us, because he's a good storyteller, but he also just really lays it out, what he walked through with his family.
Yeah. You know, we talk often about the distinction between big T trauma or tragedy in our life and then the little t trauma. And he definitely has a melding of the two. Mm-hmm. Some people, you know, in my life, I'd experienced relatively charmed life all the way up to a 2015 and a big T tragedy that happened in my life. And then many people, you know, they experience these little T traumas or childhood trauma. And, you know, some people would say, well, it probably isn't qualified as little T. It's also big T in a lot of ways, but these kind of like compounding effects that take place in your childhood. And then they end up coming out later because you find that they're suppressed. And that's what Mark talks about here. And then how he had to begin to untangle that and begin to work through those things. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to waste any time. But before we dive in this conversation that Eric has with Dr. Mark McNear, first of all, I want to make sure that you pick up Aubrey's new book. She's not here because she is very, very busy.
Yes.
And she is on this book release doing a whole lot of stuff. I've seen a lot of different appearances that she's making. Big Feelings Days. It's a great book for kids, especially. The book about hard things, heavy emotions, and Jesus' love. So make sure you pick up a copy of Aubrey's book, Big Feelings Days. And then if you're looking to take a next step or the first step in your healing journey, I would love to invite you on a free Zoom call that I do pretty regularly. It's called 5 Steps to Taking Back Your Story, no matter what you've gone through. And you can register for the next one at nothingiswasted.com/start here. So I want to invite you to do that. Amy and I will be back on the back end of this conversation, and we'll talk some more about it. We'll give you some of our commentary on it. But until we do, why don't you go ahead and listen to this conversation with Eric and Dr. Mark McNear.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to an episode of the Nothing is Wasted podcast. I am your host, Eric Shoemaker, and I am so glad to be with you again today. If you'd love to connect with me, or you'd even just like to connect with me online, I'm at EM Shoemaker, and Shoemaker is spelled SCHUMACHER, on all the social media places, and I would love to connect with you. And hear and see what you're about. I am so excited about today's interview with Dr. Mark McNear. Mark is the author of a book that's been out for about a year, Finding My Words, A Ruthless Commitment to Healing Gently After Trauma. I'll have Mark introduce himself here in a bit, but I just read his book, and I have to say I'm so thankful that I read this book. Mark, I was just telling you, I feel like the way that you've written your story of trauma with both gentleness and compassion toward yourself and towards people who've experienced trauma, but also I think just your wisdom and your just even clinical insight as a licensed therapist. I feel like this book is one of the best introductions in terms of a memoir style work into helping people understand what trauma is and how it works in people's minds and bodies and hearts. And so I would just say, listeners, listen to this interview, but go out and get Mark's book. Again, it's Finding My Words, A Ruthless Commitment to Healing Gently After Trauma. If you're new to the trauma conversation, I think this will be a good introduction to both seeing it illustrated in this story, but also explain to you what's going on in hearts and minds that have been impacted by trauma. And especially if you have a loved one who falls into that category, I think this will help you be a gentle and compassionate companion in their journey through trauma. So enough from me. Mark, welcome to the podcast. It's good to have you here.
Thank you, Eric. It's great to be with you.
Well, why don't you tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself now?
Sure.
And what you do before we get into your story.
I live in Northwest Jersey. I live about an hour from New York City. And I live with my wife, Debbie, and she's a preschool teacher. And so I have been doing some writing. I wrote the book and been doing some writing with articles and things like that, been speaking. And also my real passion is my clinical work, just working with people, especially people who have dealt with things like abuse or addictions or traumas.
Now, we're going to come back to that, to your work, because I'd love near the end of this conversation to get back into maybe how your own story has impacted your clinical work. And then also, near the end, maybe we can give some advice to people who are scared to death of the idea of seeing somebody. Maybe you can provide some help on how to pursue that. Let's dive into your story now. I'll just say to the listeners, Mark's book is it's easy to read and it's not easy to read. It's easy to read because it's well written and it's in simple language and it's accessible. And so I had no trouble paying attention from cover to cover. Listened to it on the audiobook in one evening, and it was easy to take in that way. The hard part is that Mark, your story contains a lot of difficult things that no human being should ever experience, and we know that even hearing those things can be triggering for those who have experienced trauma. What advice would you have to them before they listen to the rest of this?
I would say it, and we gave this warning in the book a couple of times just because we wanted to be really sensitive and make sure people were not triggered. If they've had a history of a trauma or they've had a history of abuse or addiction, I would say it would be wise for them to bring somebody alongside, whether it be a coach or a therapist or a friend, somebody maybe who's gone through the journey before and knows how to kind of work with their bodies and, the things that come up, maybe a sponsor, maybe a pastor's wife or woman, it depends on, who you have as your circle. But I definitely would say, if you have any reservation whatsoever, there's some hard stuff in the book. And so bring somebody along for the journey.
What about a person who's being abused right now? What should they do?
I think, we put in the book hotlines and things like that. I think that if somebody's being abused, they need to get in touch with the authorities, definitely, and get some help that way. I would say that, again, we put the warning in there because we knew that the things in there were triggering, and it might kick off somebody else's memories or traumas. And so I just wanted to be sensitive with that. And I want to reiterate, just be careful proceeding through the book.
That's good. Thank you, Mark. Well, let's jump into your story.
So it was, I guess I'll start with my dad passing away. It was over 9 years ago, maybe 9.5 years ago, that my dad had passed away. And that seemed to really change things for me. I felt so much ambivalence, so many mixed feelings about things with that. And so fast forward, he passed away in July of 2014. And then in 2015, March of 2015, I called my doctor and I asked her for refills because I was taking the medication like crazy at that point. I was taking my medication. I was taking my wife's medication. I was taking any medication I could get a hold of, and really in a lot of pain. And so I can remember sitting on the couch in my living room, calling her, getting ready to go to the pharmacy to pick up more prescriptions. And she said to me, "You're abusing your medication and you need to go to rehab." And I was like, all right, not something I wanted to hear. But, I talk about Eric as being something that was really like the worst day of my life and the best day of my life. Sometimes God walks into those situations and you're like, what am I going to do? And I was kind of trapped. And so she said, you need to go. She didn't mince words at all. And so I remember kind of pacing around the house and, I waited for my wife, Debbie, to get home from work. And I knew I needed to tell her, and I was dreading that and really anxious and, running out of medication. So even more anxious. And so I talked to her about it. And I said, do you think it's a good idea? And she got a big smile on her face and she hugged me and she said, it's all going to be okay. I'm so proud of you.
Wow.
And that was not something that I was expecting. And then I got in touch with my daughter, Emily. She was in Florida at the time. And I contacted her. And I remember her, without talking to Debbie, she didn't talk to Debbie. So she was hearing it from me first, said to me, I'm so proud of you. And so that really gave me so much determination to get better. I didn't know how I was going to get better. I had no clue.
Yeah.
Could
you unpack, Mark, their responses and why that was so important?
I think that it was unconditional love. I had made a mess of my life. And, Debbie's like, we're going to get through this.
Mm.
And I love you. And it was in March, and she said, look forward to Easter. Easter's coming. Look forward to Easter, new beginnings.
Mm. That's
And
wonderful.
so there was just like, I was dripping with shame,
Mm-hmm.
and guilt.
Yeah.
And so the Lord was so good to me.
Yeah.
I didn't see him in those days, but I kept walking. I just kept walking forward.
Yeah.
And there was a
Yeah.
bit of faith, even in walking forward, that there was hope.
Yeah. I just think of how your wife modeled Christ
Absolutely.
in that
Debbie,
moment.
like just so much grace and so much mercy and so much love and so much kindness. And, also when we're driving to rehab, she drove, I was in no shape to drive, and, I packed my bags and, I'm going off to rehab. And, it was just so painful.
I imagine.
And, Debbie's talking in the car and saying, this is wonderful. This is going to give us a new future. And I'm thinking like, oh, like I didn't see it, but there was like just a glimmer of hope,
Mm.
and I remember she gave me a verse that didn't mean a lot at the time because I was just so flooded with emotions, but she gave me Psalm 30 verse 5, that sadness tarries in the evening, but joy comes in the morning. And so it was, to be honest with you, it was quite a long time before I felt that joy, but it came and it's here now. And I'm experiencing it more than ever, 8.5 years after, starting to work on the trauma and process things. And so I get to rehab and that was a culture shock. I was used to being home watching TV half the day and then sleeping the rest of the day. I was like zoned out, and so I get there and check in, and then I'm in a room with, I guess, maybe 25 guys, and so it was, I just withdrew. I could just feel myself withdraw, but, little by little, I was able to connect with them, and that was so healing for me. But at the same time, as the medications went out of my system, and I was on a lot of medication, as they went out of my system, the memories of my childhood came back. And so I'm sitting there in rehab, kind of pretending that everything's all right, and I'm joking and, and dying on the inside with memories coming up, of sexual abuse and physical abuse and emotional abuse and verbal abuse. And it was interesting because one of the first memories that came up for me was when I was about 4 years old. My dad, we were at the dinner table, and my dad was forcing me to eat carrots. I didn't want to eat them. And so I struggled with eating them and ended up vomiting. And so he became enraged, and he picked me up and he threw me into the garbage. And he said, stay there, you're a piece of garbage. That's where you belong. And so from there, it was kind of like layers of the onion, just like memory after memory. The sexual abuse came. And, I was sexually abused from about the age of 4 till about the age of 7. And then, interestingly, the abuse stopped at age 7. And that's when we experienced our first armed robbery in my home.
Yeah.
And so it happened in June. It was the beginning, it was June 1st. And I remember that our house just blew up after that. 4 men came in with guns. 2 of them were upstairs with us. We were sleeping. We never woke up. And 2 of them were downstairs with my mom and dad, my aunt and uncle. And they carried about $100,000 worth of coins and money and things, valuables and things. And so after that, things really fell apart. My mom started drinking. She definitely was affected with anxiety and PTSD. And my dad became very, very paranoid. He was before, I think, but it increased quite a bit. And he became just obsessed with catching who did it. And so, I tell one of the stories in the book that a couple of strange stories. One that I tell is that my dad broke a cement wall downstairs, and gave my sister and I forks and knives and spoons to dig out a room, and gave us a bucket to put the dirt in. So, so just bizarre things like that.
Yeah.
And then, so I'm sitting in rehab, and all of these memories, I laugh about it now. It was not a laughing matter then. It was just, so painful. And so it was, the Lord really moved in, and didn't realize it a lot of those days. I was just so filled with these memories coming up, but yet there was this hope somewhere in there that things would get better, and so, another strange story I talk about is my dad was from the Depression era. And so he became a self-made millionaire. And so he had this strange ritual where he would put $100 bills in the sink with detergent, and he would wash them. And then he would take them out, rinse them, take them out, iron them, and then pack them, so there was 10 in a bundle, and staple them, and then put them in a metal box. And, and he would stack them, back to back until there was $100,000. And he put that in the furniture, like in a compartment in the furniture. There was a hidden compartment. So just like strange things like that.
Yeah.
And just tried to go through and talk about, what it was like to be in rehab. And to have all of this preoccupation with all of these things from my childhood coming up.
Yeah.
And then, I talk in chapters 4, 5, and 6 about my childhood and just a lot of the pain.
Yeah.
I talk about the fact that, Eric, that my dad had a brother who was cognitively impaired. And back in the 60s, they referred to that as mentally retarded. And so my dad would often compare me to him. And so the message was really clear. So I did not do well in school growing up. I was discombobulated and disassociating, just really struggling with getting through each day and being scared, being in school. And, did not, as I said, did not do well with grades or anything like that. And grew up believing that there was something wrong with me, like something really wrong. One thing that happened, I talk about, you probably saw that the car accident that I had when I was 19. And so, so it's just one thing after another. So I got hit head on. I ended up in the hospital, broke my femur bone through a pulmonary embolism. And so after that, I can remember I really started searching when I got out of the hospital. And, wondering what was his life all about?
Yeah.
And I picked up a book by Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking. And so I'm reading through that, and there's recommendations, get a Bible and underline passages of faith. And so I did that, and it, somewhere in the book it said go to church. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to church. And so I didn't know what I was doing, but, the Lord obviously did know what he was doing with me. So I went, and so they had a special service on Saturday night. And it was a guest speaker. And he spoke on going the second mile. And at the end of his message, he gave an invitation to come and to receive Christ as your personal Lord and Savior, be forgiven of your sins. And so I went up right away. And again, I don't think I knew much of what I was doing, but again, the Lord did. Yeah. And so after that, I really felt the call, to go into the ministry. I thought to myself, if this is true, if there's a God, and if he sent his son, Jesus Christ, to die for me, and gave me his Holy Spirit to live inside me, this is like where it's at.
Yeah.
And so enrolled for Bible college. Did not know how I was going to get through. But the Lord was with me each step of the way. And I was in Bible college for about 3.5 years, and then started having some really serious anxiety and depression. And so I went into counseling, biblical counseling, and that was really helpful to me. And so I changed. I was originally going to go to be a pastor, and then I switched gears to be a counselor. And so I went for another 2 years. So, I went for the 4 years, and then I did an extra year for psychology, and then applied to different grad schools. I got accepted at NYU, and I went there. And then during that time, my anxiety went through the roof. And so I went to a psychiatrist. Somebody referred me to a psychiatrist in New York City. And I went there, and I didn't talk about trauma at all. I wasn't even aware that there was trauma. I talked about depression and anxiety, and I talked about just being scattered, not being able to sit still. And so he diagnosed me with major depression and diagnosed me with anxiety with panic attacks and ADHD. So I got my medications and started taking them, and, they really helped. Until they didn't, they worked really well until they didn't work.
Yeah.
And, obviously at 55, I found myself entering rehab because I needed to take more and more to get to the same level, because I wasn't dealing with the root issues.
Yeah. That's so good. I want to go back and talk a little bit about your childhood some more,
Sure.
and particularly how your father, some of the ways he treated you and how that affected you. And I want to draw our listeners' minds before we go back there to this contrast of what you just brought up with the gospel message, that, in God the Father, we have a Father who sees us in our sin and in our shame, in our shortcomings, in our rebellion, in all of our failings, and he loves us, and he sends his Son to die for us, to bear our sins, to bear our shame, so that he can adopt us as his own sons, and clothes us with the righteousness of Christ. We are in his eyes clothed with Christ, the Son with whom he's well pleased. And what a contrast that is to how you were made to feel, I think, by your own father. I want to go back to that robbery that you mentioned, the armed robbery. And there's two, and I want to get to the second one. But you mentioned that you and your siblings were sleeping as the robbery took place, so you weren't aware of it.
No.
Yet you end up being traumatized by it. And so describe to us how that happened.
Yeah. So it happened at night, and we woke up the next morning, and we woke up to a house full of policemen and my mom and dad. And you could see just visually, there was something different with my mom and dad. And so, we were let in on it, told about it, but we had limited understanding. And so here's my mom and dad buzzing around the house and all of these police and these questions. And so, hearing bits and pieces here and bits and pieces there. And then it was decided upon, because the individuals who took the things took a lot of personal information. There was a safe inside the safe, and it had like social security cards and all of our personal ID, where we went to school, things like that, report cards. And so it was decided, because my dad was chairman of the board of a bank, that we wouldn't be allowed to go to school for the rest of the year because they were afraid of us being kidnapped. And I had, I'm 7 years old. What does kidnap mean? It didn't really mean much. But, everybody's running around uptight, and our schedules change. And all I knew is there was a lot of danger, and would they come back? And I remember, Eric, that I had I would cry at night being scared that they were going to come back, and that I would have nightmares, about them coming back.
Yeah.
And so that was, just another layer of trauma that came about as a result of that happening.
I thought that was just such a good insight to how even though you weren't there for the you were there for the experience, but you weren't conscious of
Right.
it. But the what happens after that has a traumatizing effect on you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you even mentioned the house that you grew up in had a history of violence
Yeah.
and trauma before you were there.
Yeah, we were always told about, that my mom and dad had bought the house, and that the house was pretty much complete. But the story that went with the house is that there was a lot of domestic violence. The married couple that were there before, there was a lot of violence. And so something came about one day, and this is the story that I was told, where, the police were called because it escalated. And so whatever happened, the husband ended up on the front porch. And I don't know whether he had a gun. I don't know whether he was threatening the police, but they shot him on the porch. And I talk about strange thing as a kid, you just grow up with these things and you think it's normal, but then you look back at it and you go like, this was not normal. There was one of the closet doors in the living room had a bullet hole that was patched. And that was, from that day where that individual was shot and killed.
I found it so interesting that you mentioned how that story was repeated to you as a child and would have a traumatizing effect on you. And our listeners might not be aware that we might think we have to be present and conscious when something occurs. Otherwise, that's not affecting me anymore, when it very much could be.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Eric. Another story I tell just quickly is my mom tragically lost her mom during Christmas. I was in an oxygen tent with pneumonia as a baby, and my uncle, my mom's brother, had died of a drug overdose. And so I can remember my mom telling those stories. Understandably, that she was very traumatized, and that she would often say at Christmas and during Thanksgiving, I hold my breath through the holidays just to get through them, because of that horrible Christmas where all of those things were happening.
Yeah, and so that just paints a picture there. All those things, aside from what you're personally experiencing, you're growing up in a home with stories about violence and sudden loss, and people can die at any moment, and your mom's holding, like, the effect that can have on producing anxiety in a child who's growing up in that context where nothing is ever safe. Speaking of being safe, let's tell us about the second robbery, the robbery attempt.
Yeah, that was really traumatizing to me.
Hi, friend. One of the questions we get asked most frequently here at Nothing is Wasted is, how do I help my friend who has just experienced a trauma, tragedy, or major life transition? We know there are so many of you who listen to our podcast and who follow the work we do because you want to help those you love as they walk through a difficult season. We love the compassionate hearts of those within the Nothing is Wasted community and appreciate your desire to help bring healing and hope to the many and to the one, which is why I wanted to share with you a resource that we have called When Everything Changes, Navigating the Early Days of Loss, Trauma, and Tragedy. In this 4-session mini course, participants will hear from me, as well as Davey Blackburn, our founder, and also the podcast co-host, Aubrey Sampson. Aubrey is also the author of The Louder Song, a best-selling book on lament. I'll share with you practical ways to walk them through whatever valleys they found themselves in recently. We know our Pain to Purpose course is such a helpful and proven pathway for those who have had a little time to process their pain, but we wanted to also have something for those who are in the immediate aftermath of their lives changing forever. This is a great resource that you can purchase and share with your friend who has found themselves in a story very different from what they expected. In each session, they will get practical wisdom on what to expect in those early days, how to lament, and what support they need as they go through this marathon of healing. If you'd like to send this to a hurting friend, simply go to nothingiswasted.com/everythingchanges and select the course When Everything Changes gift option. We are so grateful for compassionate individuals like you who are willing to step into the pain of those they love and walk them through it. And we hope you'll find resources like this course and this podcast to be the tools you need to help those who are struggling when everything changes.
Tell us about the second robbery, the robbery attempt.
Yeah, that was really traumatizing to me. I was a young kid and came home from school. I was in a cranky mood. And my mom said to me, I want you to empty the vacuum cleaner, not something I wanted to do. And so I took it outside. I went across the street. There was a field across the street. And so I emptied the vacuum out and begrudgingly came back in and put it in the closet, and told my mom it was done. And closed the door, when I came in, but didn't lock the door. And that was just taboo in our home, that the door, since the robbery, the initial robbery, that had to be, locked at all times. But so I didn't realize I didn't lock it. And so maybe like 5 minutes later, a knock comes on the door. And so my mom bolts up and gets up and goes to the door. And before she even gets there, somebody's pushing their way in a little bit, opening the door. So my mom's standing, they step back as she stands at the door. And so one individual, a guy, is talking about how they're having problems with their car and they need to call their insurance company. So it didn't quite add up, and they were on Route 80. And so my mom is talking with him. I'm standing behind her. My sister is standing behind me. And so she's talking, and then she sees another guy coming charging up the stairs. So my mom slams the door and locks it. And at the same time, I'm trying to hit the alarm to get the alarm to go off. My sister has a shotgun that was leaned against the wall in the living room. She loads that and is pointing it at the door.
And you're how old at this time?
I think I said I was like 8 or 9. And that's one of the things with trauma. It's like about 8 or 9, it's hard because you have gaps, you have gaps in your memories. So I would say like maybe 8, 9, 10, and so all of this is going on. And so I don't exactly remember, but somehow I'm hitting the alarm. I'm hitting the wrong button. I just keep hitting it. I'm like thinking like, why is this not going off? And then my sister steps in and hits the right button. The alarm goes off. The police come really quickly. In that time, my mom is talking with the police. We're adding like little things here and there. And then my dad comes, and so my dad is talking with them. And then my mom mentioned that I left the door unlocked. And I can remember my dad just turning around and giving me a look, of disgust. And, in the book, I talk about that night being just exhausted and going and taking a bath. But before taking a bath, I look out the window at Route 80, thinking about this guy and his car, if it even was on Route 80. And my body begins to shake and I begin to sweat. My legs become rubbery. I get dizzy, and that was the first panic attack that I ever experienced. I didn't know it at that time, but, and I talk about in the book that I made sure not to tell anyone because I felt like it was my fault anyway. That's what we do as kids. We personalize things.
And that feeling of shame and not being enough, being a piece of garbage, it's your fault. That was really pressed into you. You mentioned your accident at 19. What was your father's response when he came to the emergency room?
So I'm in the emergency room and I'm thinking to myself, I have to remember everything. I get hit head on and I have to remember every detail to be able to explain it to my dad so I don't get in trouble. I have a broken femur and had developed a little bit later after the pulmonary embolism, but I was in rough shape. And so they're cutting my clothes off. And so my dad comes in and starts screaming at me in the emergency room, so much so that they had to have security take him out.
And the cause of that accident was
somebody
drunk
hitting
driver,
him.
Right? Yeah.
But I think that, I grew up with such fear that if I did anything wrong, even if I didn't do things wrong, things didn't work out too well. So if I did something wrong, I want to go back, if I can, for a minute though, to a story that's really vulnerable, really hard to talk about, and I don't think I've ever talked about this, but I'm going to talk about it on this podcast. That idea of being thrown in the garbage. So I'm out of rehab for about 2 months and doing okay, not well. Really shaky and really anxious, and felt like I was like running around without skin on, just raw emotions. So I start the day, and one of the things that I do is get a bath. It relaxes my body. So I'm in the bathtub and I'm thinking about my life and just how much I've destroyed my life. And I have all of these thoughts whirling through my mind, and start to cry and really start crying, and my body begins to shake. And I start to pray, and I say, God, you will never throw me out. And I didn't even realize, Eric, the connection. And then I realize it, and then I start crying more. And that is, the absolute truth, that he will never throw anyone out.
Yeah.
You had said on a recent podcast that you did, God can be trusted with your story. And that is just so true. And that's what I want people to hear.
Yeah.
My life was a mess. And God showed up in that mess with kindness that I've never even, I still can't imagine the kindness that he has from. I think about Romans 2:4. It is the kindness of God that leads to repentance. Or it's the kindness of God that leads to change. And I had so understandably wrecked my life from where I came from, and had lived such a twisted life. And just felt like, well, that's it. As far as, maybe God will tolerate me, and maybe I'll go get a job somewhere. And it was just amazing to see. It took me about 2 years to process a lot of this. I'm still processing it, but it took me about 2 years, and to get to the point where I could go back to work part-time. And I was able to go back part-time, and then felt the draw to go more. And, I think that it's interesting, Eric. I think I was trained well, in my education, but God had different training in mind for me, like hands-on training with him. And just wrestling with him. I'm not too submissive. And I will admit that, coming from the background that I came from, and yet God has been so abundantly patient with me. And so has Debbie. Getting out of rehab and just like realizing how out of control my life was. And then being able to talk with Debbie, she's so graceful and she's so funny. And, she's shaking her head like, I'm like, do you believe? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, do you believe how much I lied about? And she was like, yeah, I know, but I mean, to have someone, I sat and talked to her about a lot of the things that are in chapters 4, 5, and 6. And she just like connected with me, attuned, and was like, God's going to get us through this.
I just, going back to that, to Debbie's response to you, and the picture that, you've been able to paint of your childhood environment, and also your perception of yourself, which we leave childhood, but that doesn't leave us.
No.
And
that's such a great statement.
You make a great statement. I want to make sure we say this in your book several times. The past is not the past. if it's showing up in the present.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm going to use that forever.
yeah. That's the thing that in the book, I talked about being thrown in the garbage after eating carrots and throwing up. Fast forward till 28 years of age, I'm at a wedding with Debbie, and I'm not thinking about it. And there's steak and there's potatoes and there's carrots, and I take a fork and I stab it, and I immediately started gagging.
Oh,
And that's where like I started thinking like, the past is not the past. People say, it was 50 years. It doesn't matter.
yep.
The past is not the past when it shows up in the present.
Mm-hmm. Those beliefs are so formative that I'm a piece of garbage. The fact that you could be hit head on by a drunk driver who's 3 times over the intoxication, legal intoxication limit,
Yeah.
and you had a long hospital stay, you're in bad shape, and the thing at the forefront of your mind is, I need to be able to remember every detail so I can justify myself.
Yeah.
Or
Absolutely.
else my father's going to be angry at me and he's going to blame me.
And that spills over, I'm going to be honest, at times that spills over quite a bit into my theology.
Yeah.
Where it's like, God, I just want to let you know this. And he's like, he's running to me, like he did the prodigal son, like, skip the speech. We have a party to go to.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what part? Like, it's just so, different than what I experienced. And everywhere I turned, Eric, is so amazing to see God show up. I'm telling you, everywhere I turned after rehab, I was quick to beat myself up, but everywhere I turned, there was things on grace. Books on grace and podcasts on grace. And I turned on YouTube and there would be a thing on grace. And so, I had studied about grace. I studied the Greek, but it meant nothing compared to God showing up in my mess.
Yep.
And saying, these things don't own you. I bought you.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I want our listeners to hear is, you mentioned the kindness of God is what leads us to repentance. It's what brings change in our life. And I want the person who's listening who has made a mess of their life, either because they've just rebelled and chosen every sinful thing, or because they grew up in an environment that was a mess and they didn't know how to deal with life.
Yeah, or a combination of both. That's
yes,
me.
Yeah. And we're all sufferers and sinners, combined.
Yeah.
Those things just mingle and they take advantage of each other for our destruction. We have a God who sees and knows his people's suffering and their sin, and he is kind and he's patient and he's gracious, and he's poured out his wrath on his own son, so we will never ever taste it. And so he is safe to come to as a sinner and a sufferer, because he's already made provision to shut off your speech. That whole desire, I need to justify myself. No, you're justified, declared righteous through the work of his son. And Christ is your justification.
And for me, that's so hard because I want to work on it. You know what I mean? I want to show good, and he's like, no, come. Like, you're accepted as you are. My son has taken care of it.
Yeah. He is our justification.
Yes.
He has justified our lives and our souls before God. And so I want to say, just the person who's the sinner, the sufferer, the combination, who is just scared. I hear this again and again in my counseling. If I open this box, if I speak what happened to me, my entire world will fall apart. I will disintegrate, and everything will fall apart. It will feel that way for a while, but that's not true. You have a God who knows his plans better than you do.
Absolutely. And my whole life fell apart, from that phone call with the doctor and going to rehab and just, it just spiraled. And that was God working, bringing good out of evil.
And I want to also just encourage our listeners too with being the kindness of God to the person in our life
Yeah.
who's in this place. It is easy, and I've failed so many times as a friend, a pastor, a parent, a spouse. It's easy to get frustrated with somebody else. And your wife could have only seen what you were doing, the lies you were telling, the self-destructive things you were doing, not knowing any of your story. And you could have told her, this is what happened. My doctor says I need to go to rehab. And what would have happened to you if she had responded in an explosion of anger?
Yeah.
You're worthless. You're awful.
And
It's
she had
about time.
and she had every right to do that. And she chose the higher road, and so did my daughter. And it made, I want listeners here. It made I didn't deserve it. I'll say that to you, but it made such a difference because it made me want to work even harder to get better. And I talk about in the book, Eric, that I decided I wasn't going to tell people that I was going to be sober, or that I was never going to relapse. I was just going to do it. I was going to put one foot in front of the other, and I was going to figure out, with the help of others who went before me and with God, I was going to figure it out and, stay clean and sober.
Yeah. Grace is the grace of God, shown through Christ and shown through his people, is such a motivator for change. Because when it's do good, be better, grit your teeth and fix yourself, and we're going to withhold love from you until you're perfect. Well, you already know you're not. You already know you're such a big mess you can't dig yourself out of this hole.
Right.
And any effort you try, you're just going to go further into this mess. And it drives you into secrecy. I can't let everybody's already so disappointed in me. I can't tell them this other thing. But grace brings us so much freedom to go, I'm seen and I'm not alone. And I loved what you said too about you had school, you had training. I assume you were practicing.
Yeah,
you're caring for you're caring for other people.
Yeah.
And sometimes we as caregivers, we're like the mechanic whose car is never fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons too, Eric, I wrote the book, to give that picture. It's a unique picture of somebody who was a counselor who, fell greatly, and by the grace of God, got up.
Yeah.
And started his life over again, and felt like I could add different things to the book that maybe somebody else was not able to. And I was encouraged to. People, counselors said to me, we've never heard a story like this. We would really like you to take the risk and to write it, and so, no, I didn't take care of myself, and I didn't have the faith that I needed, and I didn't care enough about myself to do it.
And I've walked through those seasons as a pastor where I was in very dark places, waking up wishing I hadn't woken up, and thinking I cannot tell anybody about how I'm doing because I need to be spiritual Superman. And I think of, you mentioned you had all this training, but God had a different school for you to learn from. And I think of in Hebrews where it says that Jesus had to become like his brothers and sisters in every respect so that he could be a gracious and merciful high priest. And he knows how to give us help in time of need because he was tempted as we are. And Jesus, the eternal Son of God, becomes a human being and lives our life suffering all the things we suffer and doing it sinlessly so that he can die for all the ways we've failed. And he comes through it with not just intellectual knowledge as omniscient God, but experiential knowledge as a human being so that he knows experientially how to help us in our weakest moments. How has your story changed your ministry to other people?
Hi, friend. I wanted to take a quick minute to connect you with a free resource that I know will be helpful in your pain to purpose journey. It's our free 7-day devotional that you can sign up for right now. With it, you'll get 7 daily devotionals written by our founder, Davy Blackburn, delivered to your inbox each morning. These are adapted from our Pain to Purpose 42-day devotional and are full of daily scripture readings, questions to reflect upon, and prayer prompts to help you focus your heart. If you're looking for some encouragement in whatever you're facing, this is it, and it's free. You just have to go to devo.nothingiswasted.com to sign up. I don't know your story, but what I do know is that God isn't done with it. Whether you've endured a recent loss, a divorce, an unexpected diagnosis, or some other pain point, God wants to give you hope when it seems like it is lost. Let's take 7 days together to find that hope in whatever you're walking through. Sign up today at devo.nothingiswasted.com.
How has your story changed your ministry to other people?
I think it changed it totally. I had an academic approach, and I really cared about people and was able to help people. But I think that, Dan Allender says you can only take people as far as you've gone yourself. And so that's been a challenge for me because, just moving ahead and just experiencing a lot of healing and having people come in, who are so broken, worrying about the addictions that they have, and not that they shouldn't be concerned, but the addictions are not the problem. There's a root issue. They're just symptoms of the problem.
Yes.
And so as you work on a lot of the root problems, the urges and things like that go away, but, people just doubled over in shame.
Yeah.
I've had so many experiences where people have showed up and I have been able to share some of my story with them, and they knew me before. And, they're struggling with some of the same things. And just to be able to bring, the kindness of God that leads to change.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. I think that I am, like Debbie and I look at each other, we'll be in the car and we'll just smile and we'll be like, how did we end up here? And we know how, it's through the grace of God that we ended up. But it's it's a story of, real ashes to a goodness of God, that just feels, and that's why I wrote the book, and that's why I wanted to, start speaking and doing things like that, because, I want to be vulnerable with people. Eric, I have depression, I have anxiety, I have flashbacks, and I'm like, I have been learning lately how to bring them into the presence of God, and he's not offended. He's not ashamed. He welcomes me.
Yeah. Let's unpack that a little bit.
Sure.
So you went through this. You went through rehab. You've gone through this journey of addressing your trauma. You're not fixed.
No.
Everything's not okay now.
No.
Talk about that and talk about what it means to, what does it mean to bring those things to God?
Let's unpack it, okay? So one thing is that, we're not going to be fixed down here. It's not going to be until I see Jesus face to face that I'm not going to have this anxiety in my body. Yeah. This anxiety in this body has protected me from a lot. And so it's not something that I need to curse. I need to bless it. I need to look at it as a blessing. So, I get done with one thing and another thing comes up or another memory comes up. And so, for the longest time in my recovery, Eric, I have been ashamed to bring those things to God, those messy, messy things. I have been invited by different pastors to do that, especially my pastor of my church, has invited me. And so I bring those things to him. What does it look like? I hand them to him. I come humbly before him and just say, I'm really struggling with this. Let him know what happened to me in childhood, like he doesn't know. But I just say, this happened, and and so I just have time spending time with him. And I'm not. in my life, it was always looking for the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm not really looking for the outcome. I'm just spending time with him
Mm-hmm.
and handing
Mm-hmm.
things to him
Mm-hmm.
and saying, I really don't know how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes I don't know how to pray.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tell him, like, I don't know how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have the theology background and I have, you know, but I don't know how to do it. Like here, I'm just going to hand this to you.
Mm. Yeah.
Because you say to hand it to you. And so,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
so there's just a different approach as far as my interaction with God.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it feels right in this period, you know, as I go through things, you know, like I said, I struggle with anxiety, I struggle with depression, I struggle with flashbacks, I struggle with a lot of internalized anger,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but it's not like it was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
That's good news too.
So I see the progress.
Yeah. And I think that I loved what you said about your pastors invite you to share these things.
Yeah.
I know a couple thoughts that came to mind is one is you probably experienced this in the counselor's office. You know, I experience this when I'm doing pastoral counseling. You know, people will come in and they need help and their heads are down. And they'll often, you're not surprised by anything, right? You've said that before. You're not surprised by anything you hear in here, right? And it's okay for me to share this, right? And you can just tell the shame there.
Yeah.
They want to be seen and loved, but their shame makes them afraid to be seen.
Sure.
And they share it with their head down and they're looking someplace else in the room. And then there's that moment where they find the courage to look at you and see how you're looking back at them. And to have a sympathetic witness, someone in the room who loves them and accepts them and says, I'm not ashamed of you. You know, I see what you went through, and that was wrong. That shouldn't have happened to you. And I've just found that to be such a valuable thing. I think just because I've known how much I've needed that.
Yeah, just to be seen and accepted and welcomed.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is I loved what you said just now about you used to be concerned about the results. And we have this idea about we need to be fixed. And until we see Jesus face to face, until we're raised from the dead, these bodies are corrupted.
Yeah.
And we're not fixed until that's fixed. But that's helped me so much. You know, when I went into pastoral ministry, I only wanted to be a preacher, to tell people stuff. I did not want to do any counseling at all.
It's messy. It's messy.
It's messy. And I wanted to be able to be the one with the answers. I wanted to be able to fix people at the end of the session, or at least 4 sessions.
How did that work out?
It doesn't work out. And when I came face to face with my own brokenness, my fear was I don't want to go talk to someone who has a pat answer that's supposed to fix me at the end of an hour. I want someone who's going to see and hear and step into this with me and help me understand what's going on inside me, help me understand how I'm thinking, help me understand who Christ is in the middle of this.
Yeah, Kirk Thompson talks about, you know, we want somebody who will sit there and not leave the room.
Yeah.
You know, just be there with you in your pain and in your suffering.
And so our fear is we're afraid that we're too much. If we bring this to someone, I'm too much for people, and everyone I love will leave me if they know these things. And what helped me was, one, just being broken myself and learning what I needed. But then also the realization that I'm not the fixer. Christ is. And I don't have to have the answers. Sometimes I just need to have good questions. And sometimes I just need to listen and say, I'm sorry and I love you. And sometimes it's just, you know, I'm really proud of you for having the strength to share.
Absolutely.
The number of people I've seen break down in tears because no one in their entire life has said, I'm proud of you. And what they've done is really, really hard work. And so I'm just thinking, maybe you can I'm going to ask you to share two final words. But I'm thinking about the listener who has people in their life who have gone through trauma and they're afraid to enter into their story because they feel like they're going to have to fix their friend. What would you say to the friend who's coming alongside someone?
I would say, and this is an experience that I had. I had a counselor, and I talk about this in the book, Harry Flanagan from Pure Desire Ministries. And, he said to me, if you want to open up about these things and start talking about them, we can start talking, but we're going to take it slow. I had a psychiatrist at Rehab who said the exact same thing to me. You can talk to me about anything. It's going to take you a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And he only knew a little bit of my story, just a tiny bit. So I would say to the person that wants to help to come alongside, I would say, one, keep it in your mind that this takes a long time, and that the person should not ever be pushed. They need to take it and let it unravel as God is doing it in their life, and not be pushing for the results or the end results, because it's a process. It's not a procedure.
Yeah, that's a great word. That's a great word. A friend who doesn't leave, and I think that's freeing as a friend to go, maybe what I need to do right now is just listen, and love them when they're done sharing, and especially as a friend that's not the therapist, not the counselor, not the pastor, like, just be a friend. What would you say to the person they've listened to this podcast, maybe they're hiding their addictions, maybe they're going, ooh, this puts some things together with me. I think there's some stuff in my life I need to address. How would you encourage them right now?
I would say that I would recommend them to just find one person. And if they don't know that person, pray and ask God for that one person. Somebody that's safe, somebody that will keep things confidential, somebody that you believe will honor your story, and take it slow. I sat, Eric, I sat in 12-step meetings and didn't say a word and just listened to other people's stories. And I knew mine was much different in a lot of ways. And so just being able to absorb their stories and hear people that had gotten to the point where they could talk about their brokenness and still keep their head up. I think that, that's a powerful testimony. And my righteousness is not in me. It's in Christ Jesus. It's in what he did for me.
Amen.
And so I would say to the person, the first thing, if they don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, to kind of search that out. Talk to people about it. Talk to somebody that possibly knows Christ. I would say that just to let them know it takes time and not to pressure themselves. I pressured myself so much, and I still do. And so just allowing the Lord to lead is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. That's good. Thank you for that, Mark. Mark, thank you for your time, for your vulnerability, your willingness to put hard things to paper and to put them out into the world. You have served many people through your book, and I know that you will serve many people through your book. And if people want to connect with you, find you online, where should they go?
They can go to Mark McNear, MarkMcnear.com, and there's a section on my website where they can contact and email me.
Okay, great. And again, Mark's book is Finding My Words, A Ruthless Commitment to Healing Gently After Trauma. Mark, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Eric. I really appreciate it.
Well, it was a great conversation.
Unbelievable.
I can see what you mean when you said it was just very impactful, that there's still a lot that you're chewing on after you listen to that.
Yeah. I mean, he went through so much. And even he says, he talks about how now as a professional therapist of 30 years, he's living out his life in healing and freedom, but he's sharing it with, his clients or whatever. So
Right.
that he's letting it ripple out beyond him, even though he could be in a very different place,
That's right.
than he is
Right.
right now. Yeah, he's walked through a
Man.
lot of healing himself.
Yeah, I think what was, one of the things that was particularly impactful was hearing about the response of his wife to his addiction,
Yes.
his daughter. Addiction is one of those things that creates this, it's a very cyclical in nature in the sense that you are hiding and harboring an addiction, and then you're afraid to talk to anybody about it because of the shame that might bring. And, but then if you talk to somebody and they do, in fact, affirm your fears by a poor response or a response that's shame filled, that can cause you to go into hiding even more. I mean, you think about it in Genesis 3, it was shame
Yes.
that ultimately was the impetus behind Adam and Eve trying to create fig leaves for themselves.
And hiding. Yeah.
And hiding, and so I think obviously there's a part of it where there's a natural response if someone feels betrayed or they feel angry or, and so they can lash out or they can respond, not realizing what that's going to do to further exacerbate the issue with the person who is in that addiction. Once they find out that kind of response, I think sometimes there's other people who are very justice oriented and like thinking that they need to like
Correct.
point
the
out
person.
more like why what they're doing is wrong, and it's like they don't need to know that at that moment.
So-
like I think that's what's really like we have to creating a safe space
Yes.
for our we have to create a safe space in response to other people if we're going to help bring them into freedom, bring them into healing. And it's not like I think we're afraid sometimes if you find yourself in that situation, you can be afraid that you're giving them license or a pass to just
Right.
continue in their behavior.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, I want to make sure that I draw a line of demarcation right here and say, like, this is not right. This is wrong. It's like, well, I understand, but also at the same time, that can, the way you do that can bring them into a lot more hiding and shame, or it can bring them into healing. I liken it to this. This is a very trite example, but it kind of is what I go to all the time. Like in baseball, I played baseball through college. If I would make an error, I knew I made an error. Like there's no hiding that, right? Like
Yeah.
you boot a ball, ground ball's hit to you and it goes through your legs, or you boot it and you don't get the guy out. It's like, I played shortstop. E6, that was like, it would flash up on the screen like that. Everyone knows right there. I just messed up, right?
Oh gosh.
To go into the dugout then and have your coach chide you, berate you, get on whatever, right? It's just like,
Yeah. Not
I
super
don't-
helpful.
I don't need that. That doesn't,
Yeah.
right? And I didn't,
Yeah.
I had some great coaches, so I didn't, but there were a few times where it was like that. Now I'm feeling shame.
Right.
And that doesn't motivate me to do better next time or to come out of that kind of quote unquote, come out of that addiction or that behavior.
Right.
That just makes me want to go into hiding more.
Yes.
I don't want to leave the dugout.
And there will be time to draw boundary lines. There'll be time to bring
course.
correction, right? Even as a parent, like there's times to do that. But when someone's coming to you with a contrite heart saying, I need help, like that's not the time to say, well, let's make a list of where you failed, like all the places you failed. Like you can even think of that like as a parent or a roommate or whatever. It's like if someone's coming to say, I'm sorry and I need help. It's not the time to berate them, right? So I think his wife's response was so palpable and so healing for him, and even for us to hear it, to say, I'm in this with you. Now, she didn't say, I'm in it with you, you don't need to go. She was saying, okay, you do need to take this step.
Right,
And
right.
she was supportive of his, next step towards healing. But
And to your point, that was her creating a boundary, like a drawing a line in the sand and going, hey, you need to go.
yes.
But the way that she did that,
Yeah,
the
but I'm
approach,
in
that
it
was
with you.
game changing, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm in it with you. I know
No
you don't.
shame.
I know you don't want this, right? I know. Like it's trying to get that place of empathy where you go, I know this is not your heart. I know this is not your desire. I know this is not, and so I want to be in this with you as your teammate. Like how empowering is that as opposed to
I'm imagining,
opposite
Davey.
approach?
Yeah. I'm imagining a lot of our listeners have not received that. A lot of our listeners, they've maybe tried to go to someone they love and express what's going on, and they didn't get that unconditional love. So I just want to acknowledge that. Like, if you try to, it may not be addiction. It may be some other pain point in your life that you've tried to express it and you felt dismissed or misunderstood.
It's good, Amy.
Just hear from us that we're our whole team, each person on our team here at Nothing Is Wasted has had trauma, pain, loss, grief. Like that's some of our entry point to the ministry is because we've stood in those spots. And so we'll hold space for you as a ministry and offer you that kind of unconditional love that doesn't have heaping amounts of shame with it, because you maybe didn't have the experience that Dr. McNear had with his wife. And so you took the brave step to say something, but then you didn't get that response that you really hoped for on the other side.
Right.
So, yeah.
Wow. Well, as just a little bit of a pivot to another thing that was very notable is I think his whole story has this motif of, generational sin or generational curses, as we call it.
Pain.
And, we talk about this in the Pain to Purpose course, finding your family of origin, identifying different places of generational, as scripture would call it, generational curse. And then, we qualify what that means. It doesn't mean that somebody put a curse over you. It just means that there is this thread that is happening generationally through your family. And often you'll discover that your parents, your grandparents have some of the same struggles as what you did. You have a propensity toward that. And what's interesting about that is both spiritual in nature. It's also physiological in nature. That when we find out, I've recently learned that there is a genetic expression that can take place, just like what we talked about a few episodes ago of like the ruts or the grooves that can be formed in your brain. Certain addictions, certain patterns, certain belief systems, they can express in genetic coding. So they actually can get passed down genetically to the next generation. And that can seem overwhelming. It can almost feel defeating to be like, well, how do I, right? Like, man, I just must be destined for this kind of a thing. I'll never be able to get out of it. The beautiful thing about that is that genetic coding, that expression can change again. Its expression can change again through healing.
Wow.
So you literally, right, you can draw a line in the sand for your family where you go, okay, I'm the last generation that's going to struggle with this.
This is broken now. Yeah.
We're going to break this addiction. We're going to break this. And so I just want to encourage you with that we know that can happen in the spiritual. We've seen those kinds of breakthroughs. We've seen that kind of deliverance take place in the spiritual. It's going to also express itself in the physical. That's how holistic God created us to be.
Yeah. I was thinking about that, Davey, with listening to his story of his dad kind of labeling him as garbage at 4. And his dad probably didn't think of him all day long as garbage, but that moment of rage that came out of him and just over him, not liking his carrots and that whole situation from the story. But he was 4 and here he is as an adult and is still carrying that label. He's not carrying it, but it could be. That's what's the whole point is he could be, he's obviously it's still in his heart. He still thinks about it.
Right.
And then even his mom, I was thinking about this, thinking about Mark McNear as a child. Mark, as a little kid, was growing up in a home where he was either experiencing rage or his mom holding her breath through the holidays because someone might die. And she maybe didn't even say anything all the time. I know she did, would be fearful and he would experience that, but he was absorbing both of those.
Right.
And I was thinking about that. Honestly, Davey, I got a little emotional when I was listening to it because I thought about you and Christy. And and this whole community knows your stories. And if you don't, they're in former podcast episodes of both your stories separately have had trauma. Right. And just, I know your family and that you guys are pursuing health and wholeness for your family at every turn. And just, I think about your kiddos and and how their story could be so different, but what you're building is that you are, like Mark in his adulthood is pursuing health. You guys are doing that you're not passing on your trauma to your children, and you're passing on your healing, and how powerful that is. And it's generational, so your kids as adults, what are they going to pass on? It's going to be what you've taught them how to, they're still going to have their own traumas. That's life. They're going to still have their own pain, but they're going to be equipped to navigate it in a different way. So I was getting emotional listening to it, just thinking about you and Christy's family. And yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, to bring this full circle a little bit, you said you first pictured like young Mark McNear, like as a child. And I found that can be really helpful when we are interacting with or working with or just doing life with anybody who has experienced trauma. You can, if you picture them as a child, it goes back to it. All of a sudden, your heart gets filled with compassion or empathy. And now you're receiving, the way they're showing up or what they confess to you or whatever, a lot differently.
Yeah.
It's like if we can drive back in our own hearts and in other people's, like back to the childlike heart, back to, and it kind of dawned on me one day. I was looking at Natalia, and all of a sudden I got a picture of Christy when she was, I think Natalia was 8 or 9 at the time when this kind of occurred to me. And I got a picture, a window into the 9-year-old Christy.
And all she was going through. And
then I looked at her story through that lens, and my heart just absolutely shattered.
Of course.
And it was like, oh my gosh. Like, then all of a sudden I felt all of those feelings like I want to be a protector. I want to be a rescuer. I want to be like someone who just wraps her up. And, and when I felt that, I felt like that was the truest and most beautiful form that I had felt before of just like being a safe space for my family, both for Christy and Natalia and my sons. And, it's like, if I can remember that, like peer into the childlikeness of everybody, how much easier is it to be a safe space?
It totally is. Yeah. Yeah.
So
those experiences as a child, they form you, they form like small things of like, I remember my dad, I spilled paint on the porch and it was brick. It could, and he was just like, he kind of was like, well, I got the pressure washer and sprayed it off. He didn't shame me for it and yell at me. Like, cause it could have been a different thing. I could have, I have that memory of him being like, it's all temporary anyway, kind of expression of like, but he could have been really mad.
Wow.
Wow. Instead of like,
man, how many times do I get so mad when my kids are, man, Lord help us.
I know, right? And I do it too. I mess up too.
Repair all the times that I'm like, we're like already saving up for their counseling.
I know. Yeah. We all need it.
I know, man. Yeah. It's so helpful. So helpful. Amy, this has been incredible having you
Thanks,
join me on the
Davey.
Nothing Is Wasted podcast. We're going to have to do this a lot more often. That'll be so much fun.
Definitely an honor to be here.
Oh, man. Well, we love having you on the team. And you guys show some love to Amy. Reach out to us on Instagram at Nothing Is Wasted Ministries. Give her a shout out. Rate and review the podcast. We'd love to hear just how these episodes or any episodes that you're listening to have impacted you. It encourages us to read your stories and to hear how, as Amy mentioned a couple episodes ago, a lot of times we're doing a lot of back end work, a lot of administrative work. We're trying to create infrastructure. There's a lot of conversations that are not necessarily like the ministry conversations that really bring us life. And so it's so helpful to hear how God is using this ministry to impact you. And it fills us with life, encouragement. It heals our hearts. Yes. It makes what we've walked through and what we're doing every single day so much more meaningful. And so we would love to hear that from you guys. Just go and leave a review on the Apple Podcast app right there. We'd love for you to subscribe and share there on YouTube. And for those of you guys who like to watch podcast episodes, I just started watching some of my favorite podcasts. And I'm like, oh, I can see why. When you see like someone's face and it totally does not match up with what you pictured their face, like their
I
voice.
know. It's weird.
Like, man, that's so different than what I thought. But, okay. But, so yeah, if you like to watch on YouTube and like to bring some congruency to us as people, please make sure that you subscribe and that you share. We would love to invite you again to follow us on Instagram at Nothing Is Wasted Ministries. You can follow me at Davey Blackburn. You can follow Aubrey at AubSamp. You can follow Amy, let me get this right, at This Wholehearted Life _.
That's it. That's
This
it, Davey.
Wholehearted Life _. And we want to make sure to thank Sleeping at Last for providing all the music for the Nothing Is Wasted podcast. Okay, next week, Amy, this is a big deal. Next week is our 300th episode.
I can't believe it, Davey. And what a guest we have.
What a guest. Like,
it's a big celebration. And our team's going to be together, Davey, which is so awesome.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. One of the GOATs.
Yes.
of all time, Max Lucado.
Awesome.
Now, I asked him in the interview how we're supposed to pronounce his name. I've always wanted to ask him that.
Okay.
So just to give you a little teaser, the first question I asked him, and he shares a really funny story.
Okay.
About that. But I asked him, okay, hey, how do you pronounce your name? Because some people it's like Lucado. Potato.
I wonder if it depends on where you're from, maybe. Yeah.
So if you want to hear him answer that, definitely need to join us. And plus, it's just an incredible conversation. And it's our 300th episode.
It's amazing.
I cannot
300 stories of pain to purpose, David.
I never, ever, ever imagined 300 episodes of this.
All of this healing that we're highlighting. And there means there's hope for those who are listening, right? There's hope for your story too. It's awesome. That's right. It's exciting.
That's right. That's right. So join us next week. Here's a little clip from my conversation with Max Lucado.
But I've always had a heart for people who, like me, just really blew it. Just really were screwing life up. Even though I had great parents, even though I had a great small town I grew up in, I couldn't blame my environment. I had every opportunity in the world, but I was on the verge of really blowing it. And so the grace of God is what wrecked me, that he could forgive a jerk like me, really shook me up, and it had its intended impact on me. And so I think that's why I've been a real, that's been my message for people, that God really doesn't give up on us. The title of this book, that he really pursues us and loves us. And so that's where a lot of my world comes from.
Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing Is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.